Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. Today I talk with Bitkiwi Paul, co-organiser of the Bitkiwi Meetup Events. Now we are coming up to the end of the year, and it is a good time to think about what has come to pass and spend time with family and friends. Bitcoin is just a bit of code, some words, a computer network, but for many people it can be a catalyst for profound personal change, looking at health, introspection, self-development, and a reassessment of one's role in the community and in life. You can call it meaning-making or finding purpose, but there is something about the idea of Bitcoin that is powerful, and I do hope you enjoy this exploration with Paul. If you would like to support the show, please consider leaving a review or boosting some sats via your favourite podcasting 2.0 platform. Otherwise, onto the show. I've just been on this journey of discovery, trying to articulate what it means to be a sovereign individual, because it's like a proto sovereign individual, because I'm not like fully there yet, but it's like when I turn around and look behind me, I'm like, holy shit, I've come all of this way. It's like climbing a mountain. It's like, wow, you look down and where you came from, and I'm just like drifting through, and I'm meeting these people, and it's like, well, what do you do? And it's like, well, I was trying to think about this last night. So I'm living halfway between the dream world and the real world. I'm in this place of just deep introspection and trying to understand my place in the universe and God's plan for me. And that sounds really fucked up when you say that out loud, but like, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I feel like Bitcoin brings this. Like, man, you might not attribute it all to Bitcoin, and some of the things in my life would attribute them all to Bitcoin. But the principles that spreads through you, the way it makes you start to think, and what it makes you value, is it naturally brings you to a lot of introspection. I've done so much more introspection in the last couple of sort of 3 years or so than the first however many years of life.
well,
Just it's been crazy.
and I think the real big difference as well is that Tokyo as a site of personal transformation. I was here, say, in 2019, I sort of left, but I was already kind of out of here by 2018. Like, I wasn't really living here anymore. So it's been a couple of years, and in that time, so much has happened. And when I walk the same streets, like last night, I walked 16 kilometers, just around Tokyo, and just through these side streets and just through the night. And it was this beautiful Socratic like discussion along the way where we're just like talking about what we are, where we've come from, these kinds of things, just following the river. We ended up like kind of walking through some old neighborhoods that I used to live in. And along the way, I realized, like everything's changing. And there is an intellectual way of engaging with that where it's like, well, we're going to go and become a prepper. We're going to try and fight off this change and this kind of wave of unknown things that is coming our way. But at the same time, it's like kind of surfing it and letting this more humanist subconscious thing kind of speak up and, listening to the whispers of the ghost inside. And it's just like a really revolutionary way of thinking about things. And as I was saying to you before, but we started recording this kind of unmei no nagare, this wave of fate, I call it, this kind of project I'm working on, where it's like someone says something or recommends, I talk to someone or recommends I go somewhere, I'll just go and do it, and I'll just see what happens and give it a go. Mm-hmm. And it's a very stochastic way of living, and just sort of see what happens,
I think it's a pretty cool way to live. It's obviously, you manage your time, but if you've got it and you can just try, just do, someone suggests something, just do it. It's funny to say that because I've had a lot of things in the last while where I've done things like that. Like, should I go meet this person? I don't really know them. I haven't seen it for a long time. And then you're surprised that that discussion opens up or opportunities for other things or new interests and motivations or new connections and relationships. And if you do a series of those things, it just sort of snowballs. Before you know it, a few months later, your time has been dominated by things you never would have guessed a few months before. And so it's great.
Yeah, it's interesting how it just happens, right? And I think what again, what's really interesting is, I used to be here, and Tokyo is such a fiat city, man. Like I couldn't believe how I even managed to live here before. It's like everything is a transactional. It's everything is a transaction. Everything is time based. Everything is unit based. It's you go from here to there. It's going to cost this much, and I've only got this amount of time to meet that person, and that kind of role of serendipity is really just not non-existent. And so I'm at this
Mm.
co-working space that's like 2 minutes away from where I'm staying. And I go there just to try and use, a proper desk and stuff and have a monitor. And there's this other foreign guy who came in and he was like sitting next to me, but he was all like masked up and he was like, he literally like pulled all these like movable wall things to like lock himself into this tiny little cubicle. And it was like every orifice was plugged, he had his headphones on, his
Oh
mask
my
on,
God. Yeah.
like, and,
Really?
and,
Yeah.
and I was like, man, I literally, I was just sitting there. I was like, man, I just want to smile and like find out who you are and what your name is. But no one has time for that sort of shit in Tokyo.
You've got to laugh though. If that's how you feel about people around you, what are you doing in Tokyo?
No, well, so
Like,
that's the funny thing, man. Like I'm here right now, and it's this, because I've been traveling around different places, but I'm back here just to do a few things. But when I first came back this time around, I was like, man, I hate this place. It was repulsive. But then I just sort of leaned into that, and I was like, well, why do I feel that way? And that's again that feeling of like looking back down the mountain and being, well, I used to be one of these people, like riding the
mm,
train and just like being sandwiched in and like being like being a fiat agent, being an entity in this
mm,
machine. And now that I'm like out of the machine, but I'm still like floating through, it's like the internal structure of it. I'm like this like loose
mm.
nut, just like causing damage where I go. Uh,
I was actually referring to the guy with who
oh, me.
masked up
Oh,
and put a
sorry.
cube. No, the guy who masked up and put a cubicle around himself. I
Yeah.
was thinking about him. I was like, man, if that's how you feel, mate, about being in crowds, what are you doing in Tokyo?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should be getting a cottage in the countryside because you just don't
Yeah.
want to be around people. You don't want their breath on you.
Yeah. But it's I see it everywhere I go. And I mean, my best friends here are like all Japanese guys who have managed to kind of, they make it work. But I remember just when I was living here, I was like, yeah, there's this kind of this othering effect, which is just really strange. And people sort of end up isolating themselves. And the compassion that I bring to that now, though, is that I think of it through a Bitcoin lens, which is that Tokyo is a site of fiat. It is a concrete megacity. It was built from the ashes of fiat wars, and these kind of ideas. And that wasn't a lens that I ever had before. And I think I was just sort of shouting at clouds, trying to make sense of it. But now I'm like, yeah, that's the true Japanese sort of way of living is, you go to the countryside and it's just a totally different picture. And people were like putting out more than they get back. This kind of, it's this like proof of work mentality where you're willing to give things a go. You're willing to make a compromise or work with someone on something. Whereas Tokyo, it's like, unless there's a transaction in there, it will just never happen. Um,
Mm. And that's almost the pinnacle of the fiat world, really. That's what all of these cities are on the spectrum up towards that. Tokyo and the likes are at the top. And that's yeah.
I hear similar things about London and New York. Just the way of living, the way of being in these places is fundamental. Like the foundation of it is fiat. Um,
Mm.
Kind of the
I
big
think
F.
even just you come back to New Zealand or from Wellington, etc. I think that they would be in that same place if you just scaled them up in number. It's a natural organisation that happens, and you have to get more efficient. All these small things when there's a lot more people who are needing to do them at the same time, and it just scales up. And the majority of people in the world are living in these systems, and I'm living in it, fiat job, so right in the mix of it. You've kind of had to get. There was a long time at the beginning when I was first Orange Pill. I thought I won't be able to last in this for much longer. I just won't be able to get out of bed and go do it. But I think my mindset has changed a bit and gotten really used to it because it's working with people and sort of, I think Bitcoin's made me want to get to know them a bit better and not be so transactional with them at work. And then once you do, you start to realize they're all just normal people. They just haven't read this or seen this yet, or really their mind just hasn't flicked that switch.
Yeah.
But actually, they're just the same as me still. And so I start to I don't know, you get more motivated. As said on your show quite a few times, that Bitcoin is maybe more motivated in very fiat-based work environment. And it goes really against a lot of our Bitcoin principles, but I'm loving it and thriving in it because it's changed my mindset of what this is, and it just changes how I do things.
Yeah. Well, I went, one of my things, and in a way, I'm very thankful for my time back in New Zealand to kind of learn, I guess, accumulate different ways of being. And I think of it a lot like, a magpie sort of accumulating stuff to make its nest with. And so there's a way of existing in New Zealand, which when I first moved to Asia, I didn't really understand. I wasn't mature enough to really compute the difference in what it means to, live and work in New Zealand and kind of, go into the outdoors, or just kind of the everything you think of when you think of New Zealand, to bring that into a mega city. I wasn't really able to make that mapping kind of work. And so I always was like looking for, and I was like, man, there must be something more to it. But then as I've gotten older, I realized that there is actually a way of living in New Zealand, which is unique, which isn't the standard. People don't go hunting and fishing normally in most parts of the world. Most people live in apartment buildings, they ride subways, and they live in mega cities, billions of people around the world. And that's the unique perspective. And I think it was just, I came in with this like naivety that, everyone's got mountains around them, but they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Even I remember when I was in high school, we had studied Japanese in high school, and we did a system where some Japanese students came over and stayed with us, and then the next year we went to Japan and stayed with them. And you saw those things, like it blew my mind the first night they arrived, and you'd sort of pick them up from the airport and they walked outside and they were all just like, wow, oh my God, like what? And they're just staring up at stars.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are you guys talking about? And they're just like, well, you just don't see the stars where we live. I was like, what?
Yeah.
They're like, you walk outside and the sky's just black every night. And I was like, what are you talking? And then a year later, when I went to stay with them, they were from Osaka, and I went and stayed there, and it was the first thing I wanted to do. I got there and I looked up and there were no stars.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow.
Well, it's the permadusk, it's just the glow of the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember having a shower at the end of the day, being in the city, and the water's like grey. And you're like, what the hell's going on? And then you start to realize all these things about what life is really like in a super proper big city.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even just the way the approach to nature, just like, just climb the mountain, just, climb the tree, go through the, ford through the river. Like, it's just not a mode of existence that is very common. And I guess that's the beginning of the idea that there's different ways of being. And I think we're entering into this kind of frothy interstitial period where these kinds of questions are being asked, and people are like beginning to interrogate new ways of living, because the fiat kind of 9 to 5 career building thing is being challenged on so many levels, whether it's AI or whether it's the removal of Bitcoin, kind of changing the incentive structures for these kinds of things. There's all of these like structural changes, and I don't know, like you look at some of the people in a place like Tokyo and the work they're doing, and it's like, what is the meaning in this? And that's a judgmental position to be in, because what's the meaning in the work that I'm doing? And it's this kind of funny thing where it's like, we're all just, pretending.
Yeah. It's funny because people wanting to return to their, without knowing it, I think a lot of the time, return to their natural sort of urges. And that is doing, not that part of that system. It's actually just waking up and living your life and surviving and thriving. And I think people have been, we talk a lot in Bitcoin about the sovereign individual and progressing to that sort of world. But in reality, people were, without them maybe realizing it, progressing towards sovereign individuality already for quite a few years now. And I think it's just something that technology enables in a world like we have now. We centralize things because that's what we had to do to get better things, and it worked for a long time. Now we're in a position where technology enables decentralization, and that we can achieve all these things and faster and better without having to be centralized in all these different facets, and it's been coming on for a while now, because you saw it. You talk about like the gig economy, and then people talk about everyone's a hustler now, and you've got all these mediums you can create your own products and make your own money without needing to get signed by somebody, or get or a store to buy your product, and you can just get direct to consumer. There's all these different little things now, and you've got all these people coming out of high school who are just going straight into doing their own things and figuring out and having several different income streams, and then you progress it to the older people when it's becoming like a contractor economy. It's changing a bit in New Zealand now with the new government and the situation, but for quite some time now, it was trending down, and contractors trending up, as people realise that actually they've got something individual to offer, and they're not just filling a role. People going out to find, that guy or that girl that I worked with, she's really good at this and this, and we need that done for this job or this project. So let's go hire her. She's a contractor. She'll come work for us on an hourly rate for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and deliver that. And that's just sort of the way it's going. You find the people with the right skills, and it can be nuanced now. It's not just numbers of people in gaps. And so Bitcoin is obviously the ultimate enabler for that really. And that's where we're going to get to, and it's going to be pretty cool to see. But I imagine the whole world is just a collective of sovereign individuals and finding each other for the right skills and creating more localized economies. It's just, it's kind of a dreamland, and then that's everyone exiting that system where they're lined up in desks, or they might still be lined up in desks, but they're all got their own skill sets and different contract rates, and they're doing something different that motivates them and provides passion for that particular thing that's providing that service or product. That's where we're going to go. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, I'm also conscious, I'm on this sort of vision quest, trying to find the next thing, or I guess letting the next thing find me as I wander the earth. And I realize that, I've always known that I'm unemployable, like I don't fit into labels. I've done work as a designer, I've done work as a producer, as a photographer, there's kind of these things, right? But the whole package is like the different dots are connected and things happen. And I don't know how you put that onto a CV, it just doesn't.
Well, that's where you just build your career through reputation and networking, and that's some of the most enjoyable, because I've been doing tons of different things. That's on top of my fiat job over the last year or two, and those have been the most awesome and motivating things. Is just meeting somebody through somebody, and then finding that they have a need for something that you've got experience in or you can provide, and it's so much more fulfilling than clocking in 9 to 5. Just getting to talk to people and investigate what they're doing, and then offer some opinions, and then see it add some value is incredibly fulfilling. And then even in my regular fiat job, it's been most enjoyable parts have been when I've had an idea and seen something that could be a lot better, and then someone's given me enough trust to let me go and do it, and then you're just super motivated. You see it has success, and it's just people thrive on that stuff. No one really wants to go and clock out and do a monotonous task all day. It's just not the way.
Well, that's been kind of one of my organizing principles, because one of the big ideas, I keep talking to people about Bitkiwi actually over here, and I'm like, man, talking about organizing meetups and events, and I'm saying, hey, this is how, these guys did it in New Zealand. It was really enjoyable, some of the best events I've ever been to. And I was trying to explain like the vibe, and you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like, how do people spend 8 hours talking about Bitcoin stuff? And I'm like, yeah, well, if you come along, you'll see. And it's like trying to share that in Tokyo. And I mean, these are good guys here, but they're like, oh, we've got this time slot where this thing can happen, and we've all got to take 1.5 hour train rides back to our houses and stuff. And I'm like, look, that's just the structure of the city that makes it that way. But there's this like intangible kind of passion and vibe, and kind of a very humanist kind of emotion that is bound by these logical rules of Bitcoin. But like, it means that the only thing that can really change is the way you feel about it, because the rules aren't going to change. And so there's this real thing where it's like, you can't approach it from like an engineering logical perspective. Like the logic is set. Once you understand it, there's no changing that logic. But the way you embrace it, and this sort of social layer, and the kind of the passion, is the only variable. And so that's what my big sort of thing has been lately is like, well, what does community look like?
Mm.
Um, I was out west for a couple of weeks, west in Japan, and there's this idea like all of the cities are shrinking as everyone moves to Tokyo and the population declines in Japan. And so like everywhere except Tokyo is getting smaller and like aging. And there was these guys there talking about this like village that they were trying to like rejuvenate and get young people to like move out there, and the local prefecture was going to like give people money to like have families out there and stuff. And I was like, and again, that was like fate, like took me to this event that they were talking about this thing. I didn't plan on doing that, but that was the people that I was supposed to meet. And they were talking about, they got this village, this fishing village, and they want to build all these like houses and have these like families start like orchards and like a circular economy. And I'm like, man, that's like the most Bitcoin thing I've ever heard. And
Oh, yes.
and it's like a thing, right? And I was like, yeah. And I got to meet one of the organizers, and I was chatting to him, and I was like, yeah, that's like a new way of being
Mm.
that we haven't had access to for a long time. Um, and it's like nothing to do with Bitcoin, but it's like they're doing it, and Bitcoin is just sitting there
Yeah.
waiting to join that.
The advent of remote working out of the back of COVID is actually making these things possible. I wouldn't be surprised at seeing this stuff explode. And then when you get these types of community setups embrace Bitcoin, then they'll just be next level. Um, but that is pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah,
And so that's, because I'm so absorbed in the Bitcoin world at the time, but that's happening outside of the Bitcoin world. That's somebody thinking the exact same thing without having anything to do with Bitcoin.
yeah. Like we had this chat, so that they've got it really planned out, and it was like the most amazing thing ever. So I went to this event, and they had like a big mock up of like the village, and they had like food because they got like their local dish and specialty food and stuff, and they had like a woman there who was like preparing the food, and it's like the special food of the place, and it was like a whole thing. And I was having a good chat with them, and I was like, yeah, this is what Bitcoin is kind of part of this movement. Like Bitcoin is just one symptom of a larger human movement. Like I don't even know which one came first, but like these guys are just doing it. And then even just talking, I was at this like cafe, and there was a little exhibition upstairs, and I was talking to the girl who had her artwork there, and she had like left Tokyo to come back. And it's like it's a cultural thing. They call it like a U-turn, like going back to your hometown from the big city. And I was like, man, that's the exact same thing that's happening in like the USA and different parts of the world. Um,
Hmm.
and it's like in the local vernacular of Japan, and this kind of totally disconnected because a lot of that media doesn't really flow through. They're doing the same thing, you know. And same in China. There's a whole thing around, they call it lying flat, where you just work the minimum. You just sort of, instead of trying to like grind your way through the fiat system and getting into a top university, you're just like, yeah, I'll just work in a convenience store and do jazz music on the weekends with my friends and just kind of live my life. And it's like there's this kind of, yeah, like just a global zeitgeist emerging of like authenticity. Maybe it's maybe what it is. I don't know.
That's really awesome. I hope I hope to see a lot more than that. I want to see it popping up here. Um, Although, the fiat world will label these things cults probably and all sorts, but
We've got plenty of that here, man. And I'll tell you, yeah, that's like a whole thing as well. And I think that's another realization that is, it's not all just, happy-go-lucky. It's like there are forces at play that will, as things decentralize, there will be groups that like do it in a radical way that's like anti-human, or
mm,
it's sort of exploitative. And what does that mean? Do people, because people opt into that ultimately, if it's some sort of cult, it's like you got to choose to leave and you got to choose to go into it. But if people are looking for meaning and there's this group that provides meaning to them, it's like, wow, where do you draw the line when
wow, it sounds like a happy life to me. I mean, you're gonna have to send me the link to this village
yeah,
village
well,
name.
but like, I guess what I'm saying though is like, I mean, we've talked about this before, but there are lines, and when things start cutting you off from your family and they start getting in the way of yourself, then that's when a group can be exploitative. But I guess the cautionary tale is that's probably going to come part and parcel with these other really cool opportunities. um I don't know, man. Like I actually realized I don't know anything. Like I've, I've, I've been like, looking at this AI stuff and just how quickly that's emerging. I
I've got
think
my head in the sand on that. I feel like I've got so much going on in my life that I've almost subconsciously tried to avoid it. Thinking, man, this is a whole new world, Bitcoin-esque world that I could get into that I can't absorb myself in right now. So I'm kind of relying on others to keep me up to date occasionally when I need to know.
yeah, I think it is sort of in a way a symptom again of this bigger thing. And we don't know what this bigger thing is, but we can see its shadow. And the biggest symptom is this idea of like post-truth, because AI and necessarily, like what does that mean? Like, what is the truthfulness of that? What can we trust? And it sort of just happens. It's an emergent thing that happens as we enter into this post-truth world, which in the age of COVID and Ukraine and Gaza and all of this bullshit, it's like, well, I literally can't trust anything except my node and my,
Mm.
what I'm running locally and what I'm doing here around me. And so I guess Bitcoin, it does enable you to scale up a trust system based on like, inside out. I was like, oh, well, we've got my node. I can trust, the guys I'm working with. I can trust the family and friends around me. Everything beyond that gets very fluffy
Mm.
and vague and unknown. But I don't care about that just yet.
That's exactly how I often live day to day. Like I really don't read anything about COVID or Gaza and Israel or Ukraine or really much of anything that's going on. All the stuff about politics in New Zealand lately with the new government coming, I really pay no attention unless I only pay attention to things that are directly affecting me. And so, yeah, I'm exactly the same. You can only trust your own eyes and ears. And I guess I'm always conscious of global Bitcoin stuff just because that's my passion. But yeah, and I find life to be much happier. And, sometimes I think, oh, I'm not watching the news and I'm not checking news stuff. What, I've often had a philosophy in life that, you try something, see what it's like first, and then make an assessment and just decide to keep doing it or stop it. It's pretty sort of a logical sequence. And stopping watching the news and keeping up with the current affairs, it's like, okay, what's going to happen? I might miss something important or there's something this and something that. I missed nothing. It's been going a while now. And you find out things that you need to know through other people, or some things slip into my Bitcoin feed somehow. I'm following Kiwi Bitcoiners; they might tweet about something topical occasionally, um, and you find out enough. It never happens where someone's like, "Oh, have you heard about this?" And you've got to do that, and you've got to do this. It doesn't really happen. I mean, there was a lot of COVID, obviously, but it doesn't really happen. You don't need all that. Just forget about it. Is it really things you should give a crap about and devote your precious time? Time's the only thing you got.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And it comes back to agency as well, like having the trust in yourself. And this is maybe this kind of emergent role of kind of stewardship. And even though Bitcoin is decentralized and for everyone, I think there is this kind of komatua type role. And we talk about the lifeboats, but having the agency that that no matter what happens, I've got a local community that I'm part of that I can support, that they can support me, and then also just as an individual, I'm capable of performing things that the media or the system would have you believe you're not capable of. Because I do, have this belief that people are capable of great things, and there's this kind of divine spark of humanity
Mm.
that we carry. And as I said, even just last night, I was like, because I enjoy long walks through cities and places, it's like, yeah, 16 kilometers, that's not a super big walk. That's a good 3-4 hours. And most people wouldn't think that that they'll just go and do that. And I was like, yeah, we're going to do it. We didn't bring our phones. We didn't bring anything. And I was like, we'll just go and we'll follow
Mm.
the way the city will guide us through into the night. And for me, I'm like, that's incredibly empowering to like be able to do.
As long as it's safe enough. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but even if it's not, it's like, well, what's going to happen? Like you can't live in a place where you're like, well, what if? What if? It's like, well,
Mm.
we'll just let it happen. And I mean, of course, you need to use common sense, but and if you're using common sense, you'll feel it before you think it that this isn't a safe thing to do, and you'll turn around. But it's when you intellectualize it and you say, oh, well, I don't think that's a good idea. I've got work tomorrow morning. I've got to get up. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And you start like adding noise
Mm.
and you actually don't let the thing happen that needed to happen. And I was having, so about halfway through, because I have this like philosophy of wandering, which is a whole nother thing, it's like part of my creative work. But it's like, you get this apex of the wander, you get to the end of it where you realize now it's time that we should start sort of heading back. And it's around about then that you let go of the worldly considerations where you're like, what am I going to do? Because you're thinking about work or your business or whatever for the first
Mm.
half. But then on the
Mm.
second half, you're like, oh, you just let it speak to you. And I was thinking, man, I could make this into a thing. Like, in the hyper Bitcoinized world, it's like, I'll just walk across the world and just see what happens, and it sounds like crazy, but it's like, that's like what a pilgrimage is,
Mm.
and it's like, who does that anymore? It's like this ancient tradition that no one does.
Yeah, I don't think just bringing it back to a really vague concept, just actually being in a moment is that's I know it's such a terrible cliche. It sounds so cheesy, but people don't do that. And I never did that until the last few years. I was a very fair person, and everything seemed to be had to be black and white. If it wasn't, then it was just because I didn't know it well enough yet. And that's it. Things isn't my thing, and that sort of attitude. And now I just am different. Sometimes there's times when you just like, actually, this is something that's pretty amazing right now. It's like, just the light or the view or the music is a big one for me as well. Sometimes there's something will happen. I'll just feel a certain way and I'll just stop everything else and maybe just turn it up really loud and just lie down and close my eyes and just try and forget about everything a second, just absorb into that. And even if it's only for a minute, you finish that, there's something about it. It's therapeutic. You're just like, shit. And I needed to just forget and just be in a moment, actually,
Yeah.
and listening to the sounds and feeling what things feel like that you're lying on or whatever, just focusing on those, just classic generic meditation type cliches. But you just do that stuff and it is amazing what it can
Yeah.
do for you.
And I think this commodification of time, the development, the invention of the second, of the hour, the work week,
Mm.
everything's about productivity. Everything's, it's like you've got to be a content creator, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I think that's where there's a little bit of a mismatch, because we're talking about this new Bitcoin world where everyone's their own thing, but it's still sort of framed by this fiat kind of hustle culture, productivity, hacking kind of
Mm.
mindset. And I'm like, yeah, I don't need to do that. I'm working on a novel that no one's going to read, but that doesn't matter because the act of writing it is the catharsis for me, and it's the
Mm.
release for me of this thing that I'm carrying. And I'm just wandering the city without a phone, without anything, without any worldly possessions, as I see what it
Mm.
has to show me. And that's in itself is a revolutionary way of living because everyone else around me is on their phone and they're in this little
Yep.
device in this virtualization. And that's the true
Mm.
that's the true kind of lie that's being told, is that you can find satisfaction from within that device. um,
Mm.
and I was meeting up with a friend of mine. He's studying architecture and he's been working on these projects exploring sort of how sort of urban spaces are laid out and that sort of thing. And he told me this idea of the unique specificity of the moment, and how if you just look around and you think, man, in the history of the universe, this arrangement of us right now, the people in the room or whoever you happen to be with, that will never happen again. And every moment is like that. And they're chained together. It's like the blockchain, right? It's like
Mm.
immutable. Everything has this, like the billiard balls of fate are just sent out.
Yeah.
And you're there fucking around on your phone, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, man, it's a good one. And I remember a few years ago, I was commuting all the time, and in the winter it would be dark when I left and dark when I got home. And some nights I just started to notice there'd be a really spectacular, like specific light of the moon. And like, despite doing a commute every day, being New Zealand, the drive was incredibly scenic. So the first month was amazing. Then I kind of got used to it. But there was just see these views around this inlet. Sometimes it would just be amazing. And then my first instant reaction was, oh, pulled over the car. I was like, I'll get a photo so I can show somebody this. And then you take a photo. You can never you could not capture what I was seeing in a photo. You could not, I'm not a photographer, so a photographer might laugh and say that's pretty obvious. Everyone knows that. But me trying a few days in a row and sort of thing, going, man, I can't show anyone this. I can't. And then it suddenly dawned on me, this isn't for taking a picture to show somebody. This is a moment for me, actually. And so then I didn't stop. I stopped taking photos, but I didn't stop looking. And I would pull over and I'd just get out and just stand there for a minute, just look at it. Think, man, who else is seeing this? It's pretty unique. It's just mine now.
Yeah. I mean, similar to that, like I remember in the height of the COVID bullshit, because I was definitely, half of me was intellectualizing it quite a lot, and that was sort of part of my Bitcoin journey, is understanding what's going on and these kind of power structures and all of this stuff. But I remember I was quite upset, obviously, at the time. We were going through this just chaotic time, and it was very stressful. And at the time, I didn't have the perspective to understand how it all sort of the pieces fitted together. But I remember I was hanging out in the town belt up in Wellington, up in the, there's all the pine trees and stuff. And I remember just seeing the sunset and the way the sun like shone through these like leaves onto the ground. And I was just sitting there and I was like, man, everything's going to be okay. And I remember that feeling, and I was like, there is a time and a place to intellectualize and to think about the political structures, the economics, the physics of it. But you still have to have this realization that it's all temporary, and that there's your life and your time on earth and this human moment is finite. And there's something as simple as the sun shining through some leaves onto the ground can give you this connection to the divine. And I was like, yeah, I think everything's going to be okay, as long as you stack sats and stay humble.
It's interesting because I had this real, and we're getting pretty philosophical, a little bit philosophical, but I always had this feeling like you say, everything's always changing. It's constant. And you get these unique moments and mixtures of light and people and environments and feelings. And I always just kind of saw this thing that's like, could you divide your life into these little compartments, and you don't know when it's changed. But all of a sudden something happens, or you smell a smell, or you get a feeling, and you're like, oh, I remember 6 months ago, that's how I was. And suddenly you get this flashback of what your life was at that exact point, and where you were and who you're associating with and what you're doing. And you suddenly realize that things have actually changed and they've moved now, and now you're in a different place. You might be living in the same place, but things are different. So there's different aspects of your life have changed, and actually there's a different feeling. And I almost would condense it into this feeling, and that's sort of kind of what I called it. Like, oh, I've got a certain feeling at the moment, and that'll change. And then I'll have a new feeling that'll be my life. And then I'll remember that feeling, and I'll click that things have actually changed. But you don't often realize that things are transitioning. Then all of a sudden something's become more nostalgic to you when you think about it. It might have only been 6 months ago, and you've been through another change. It's like, interesting. I often had ideas about sitting down and trying to record this of my life and trying to describe some of these compartments, but I think it's just bigger than being to live in that moment itself too.
Well, it's hard because once it's a bit like quantum mechanics or something. Like you can't describe it and feel it at the same time. You can only do one or the other.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's right.
And the way I think about it, because I'm really into jiu-jitsu, and that was a bit of a life-changing thing for me as well. But it's like you can't think about anything else when you're like rolling around, like choking each other out and like playing playing jiu-jitsu. It's just not possible to consider anything else except what you're doing in front of you. And it's like it's one of these releases, and like I always think, man, no matter what's going on intellectually, it's like, yeah, if we've got a mat somewhere or some grass or something, we can just wrestle and do jiu-jitsu and it's going to be all good. And that's like this real emotive thing. It's like a very humanist thing. It may be a bit like dancing or any kind of sport or exercise where you're moving, but you're not too intellectual about it. Because I think some sports lend themselves more to thinking. Because I used to do a lot of weightlifting and stuff, and I find that was a bit different because you can think about things still, and you can have a podcast or something. But if you're doing like jiu-jitsu, there's no podcasts, or there's no other thinking taking place.
That's a really good point, because people talk about jiu-jitsu just having lots of benefits for the mind and all this sort of stuff. I think that kind of explains it a bit, because it puts you into a meditative state almost, because you can't. It's almost a kind of it sounds like it's almost like a cheat way to clear the mind,
Oh yeah,
because all of a sudden the mind is just going to be clear, because otherwise you may break
yeah,
something
yeah,
or die.
yeah. You got to be paying attention, or you're going to get armbarred, and it's going to bend the
Yeah,
wrong way. Your legs are going to bend the wrong way, and your arms are going to break. And
yeah, yeah.
and I see it. It's part of a connection of these kind of ideas of, like, again, authenticity and connection to the present moment. And in a way, this kind of fiat structure, it's bigger than that. It's like an evolution of humanity's relationship with itself. And so we've kind of created a place where we're actually pretending to be robots in a lot of cases. Like, I look at the way a lot of service workers and people are working here, or taxi drivers and stuff, and it's like there's a certain pleasure maybe there, but it's like they're LARPing and they're pretending to just be these like automatons. And maybe that in itself is pleasurable, but
Actually, yeah, I was just when you said it, it's because I've had jobs when I was younger that were pretty monotonous sort of thing, and I did get pleasure out of it. Like when I was a teenager, I worked at KFC as a cook, and I loved it at the time. And I still occasionally have random dreams when I'm working at KFC after all these years, and I just loved it. I remember I was just fully focused on um, producing the fastest. Like at the time, I was very fast at cooking. And so I'd get all the most busiest shifts because they needed the person who was the fastest. But I took pride in that. And the cookers had timers on them. So I could time every action that was part of this job and figure out how fast I could do things. And then I'd just always be challenging myself to beat my own records. And I just found it immensely enjoyable turning up and doing that. And when you think about it, same as what you're saying about jujitsu, when I was doing that, I wasn't thinking about other things. I was just, as soon as I started that shift, I was like, all right, how can I do this better than I ever do it? And you just bang, you're into it.
well, I mean, I might have talked about this before, but I mean, the best job I ever had when I back in the day was like cleaning office buildings. I had this like vacuum cleaner on my back, and it just had this white noise, and it was late at night in Hastings, just like vacuuming office buildings, and it was just the most liminal, relaxing thing I'd ever done. And I think, man, like, fuck trying to work in an office or something, where you're intellectualizing it. It's like, I just want to be in the moment. And even that in itself, when you put Bitcoin into the picture, it's like, yeah, well, you could be sitting on a stack, and still do stuff like that. And it brings new ways of being. And I'm brought back to like Diogenes, the Greek philosopher who like lived in a barrel in the middle of the city, and he just had this like alternative lifestyle. And I think people shit on alternative lifestyles, but I think there is something to be said. Like, we don't all have to be ubermensch engineers, building amazing stuff. It's like some people, their role, and is given divinely perhaps, is to just see, like, what does it mean to just be the person who observes?
So much respect. And I love when you see those videos of like people who are like really good at some like quite bespoke skill or job, basically a job,
Yeah.
and like street food cookers in there and all that sort of stuff. I love that stuff when you see something. I think everyone saw that clip of that guy doing the popcorn at some movie theater,
Yeah.
and he was like flipping it around and that. And he's just like the king of making these popcorn things, and I just love that shit. When I come across somebody in a job, like I catch the train every day to work. I love my train guy. He is one of those guys, man. He is the best train dude you could imagine. Like, he's got systems and processes, and he gets shitty with like new people who don't understand exactly, Like, he like doesn't get shitty with them, but you can see he's a little bit put out that they don't know that you take the card out and then he scans it, or they don't know exactly when you should press the button to open the train door, or when you need to get out his way and stuff like that. And I giggle away to myself because, man, this dude is efficient, and I know his systems now. Like, I see someone get on the bag, I was like, he's going to go tell that guy that he should put his bag between the middle seats in the middle of the carriage because there's a space there, and it won't get anybody's way, and that he'll come and remind him that it's there towards the end of the journey. And not sure enough, there he is like clockwork. He's seen that bag a mile away. He's coming down to tell this guy his message, help him out. And he's just, he's the king, eh? He's the king.
Yeah. Well, I think these are questions to be broached, and it's sort of part and parcel of the Bitcoin project is, what are these alternative ways of being mean? And again, I think there is this negative connotation that, maybe it's a bit woke, or it's in this this kind of political agenda. But I think ultimately there's something about everyone that's, we all have our passions and our hobbies and our things that we do, but in a lot of cases they get suppressed, because it's like, well, I have to do it for the money, or whatever. And I think in that is the deep contradiction of our time, is that, we have to work to make the money. But if the people in the conversation that we've just had is, if the people that we're talking about here are, they're stacking sats, they've got the money, like they're all good.
Mm,
And
mm.
it sort of changes, and it creates this participatory thing where I think the fiat mindset will say, well, they're just going to sit around playing Xbox all day and being lazy motherfuckers. And I tend to think like that's not what's going to happen, because, you know, people will find their thing, and maybe it's not an economic output, but maybe it's something that's a bit more social or
Well,
holistic.
it's
But
the ability to save your wealth fundamentally changes all of these mindsets, and it's crazy because
yes,
that guy is the king white train. He could, if he knew enough about Bitcoin and was stacking sats, he's not going to be ever sitting around playing PlayStation. He which the way that the fiat system works in the Cantillon effect means that these are the people that are most taken away from, most affected, because their ability to save has just been destroyed over the last few decades, and they just need to be able to save their money. He is the king of the train, and I bet you he's the kind of guy who would put away a little bit of his money and save it, but he wouldn't do that in this world because nobody's even telling people to do that anymore, because you're just going to lose its purchasing power straight away. So when we're under a Bitcoin standard, and people in all walks of life and all levels of job have the ability to just save their money, it's just going to completely change the world, because these people aren't going to be poor. Their level of wealth is not going to come down to the type of job they have. It's going to come down to their personal discipline and principles. And so they can have a job that earns a lot less money, and they can be wealthy in this world. And that's going to change everything.
yeah, man. And what that enables as well, like, you can, be saving in this new form of money that is just superior in every way. You can build actual wealth, and then you can also find meaning. And I see here, there's a lot of elderly people in Japan. It's an aging population, and you see like a lot of these older people, coming out of retirement, to make a little bit of extra money, but also to do something to connect with people. And I think, man, there's something actually really honorable about that. Like, people, I think the myth has been dispelled that retirement is the time for golf and just taking it easy. It's like deep down, it's like if you do that, you're just going to cark it. Like you need to be doing something productive. And whether that's gardening or some kind of activity around the home, or like some sort of volunteer work, the people who live to 100 or whatever, they're the ones who are actually, especially in Japan, and, everyone seems to be like about 100 years old, but like they seem to do really well when they're in these, like, even just volunteer groups, but they're being part of a society. And the PlayStation thing, that's a fiat symptom, and it's the virtualization, and it's the disconnection from other people.
Being fear-induced nihilism, it's just
Yes.
all it is. Like, yeah, man, and yeah, you talk about things that you do upon retirement, like when you describe doing things in the community that's not paid work. I mean, it's just the same, really. They're just finding a motivation that gets them out of bed every day, something they want to go do, and it keeps you going. It gives you something to aim at. It gives you purpose. And that's what you need to do. Like, I've been in conversations where people, I'm going to do this and that. I'm going to retire at 50. I'm like, I can't think of anything worse. Like, what the hell? Like, and I will openly say in
Yeah.
conversations with people, I'm never retiring.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm never retiring. I will tail down work as my physical body demands it. Otherwise, what the hell? Like,
What are you doing? Yeah.
going
Like,
out, being
yeah.
passionate about Bitcoin and other things that are passionate in life, that is life. That's everything.
Yeah.
And why would I be looking forward to a time to stop it? Like,
Yeah.
I don't even get it anymore.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that myth is pretty dispelled. Like, I mean, shit, there isn't even a pension anyway or anything waiting for any of us at the end of it. So it's not going to happen, but it's like, you've either got to stack a Bitcoin or you don't. That's the, and so, I mean, that's part of the altruism of like trying to let people know that, yeah, the KiwiSaver ain't going to be there, depending on the, how old you are. But like, I don't see those fiat systems supporting people. And that, I mean, that interestingly in Japan, it's pretty common knowledge. They have a pension system here, and like everyone knows that you pay your pension every month into the system, but you won't be getting it out. Like young people who are working. So you're effectively paying for the current lot of old people, but
It's just a social contract, that
yeah,
you'll pay for them now, and your
but who's going to pay
kids or
for you?
grandkids are going to pay for you, supposedly.
But no one's having kids,
That's
so it's not happening, right? So, but yeah, man, I think at a high level, that's kind of part of this big thing. And I know we haven't really nailed any topics down today, but we've been exploring this idea of, what I call ume no nagare, the wave of fate. That is kind of, I'm letting it take me where I need to go and meet who I need to meet. And it certainly proved really a really powerful force to sort of delegate to fate, and I've had a chance to meet some really cool Bitcoiners, have some really deep conversations about these kinds of things. And I guess kind of take stock, because entering into a hyper Bitcoinized world where there's actually enough surplus productivity and surplus capital and all of that kind of abundance, it actually means you can do stuff like deep creative pursuits that don't have to be monetized either. Because I mean, the idea of like content and like blogging these journeys through the underworld of Tokyo and through the streets and stuff, like that's cool, but I don't actually want to do that. I want to create something a bit more. Maybe I'll write a book, maybe I'll do something else. And that's the kind of work that fiat doesn't really gel with. How can you create a beautiful piece of work when it needs to be a 6-second TikTok video,
Yeah. I loved on the on one of our group threads the other day, and it's James Scour, I think, made a comment that, I've been thinking about a lot anyway, but it was quite poignant about, people building things in Bitcoin and a completely different mindset. It's not raise a startup fund and have a launch and you've got to make X amount in month one, etc. It's people building things with no expectation of short-term profit. The actual Bitcoin principles, and you see people building things this way, and then the great irony is they'll probably end up intensely profitable because they've built it this way. It's far more likely to take some hold and be successful in the long term. And I love that mindset, and that's how I'm trying to do things. I love that that's what we're seeing come through. And you see the slow burn of the really great Bitcoin innovations.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing that's dawned on me, after I've done, there's coming up, just a month or two now overseas, but I'm starting to sort of realize, that I am this kind of emissary for, I guess not I wouldn't say New Zealand, but for my people. It's sort of I am a model for, who I think of as my people, and I want to say New Zealanders, and I mean what I mean by that, like not in the terms of the nation state, but like the way we do things. I often talk to people about mate culture in New Zealand and how you got friends for life and stuff, and it's just not maybe necessarily a concept that exists everywhere, believe it or not. And the way people can sort of stand up for each other, and these kind of things that I think are quite normal in New Zealand. But then I realized as well that it's like I'm also a model for humanity. And I sort of, I mean, it's a tall order, but it's like, how do you be good to people? Like, what does that mean? And I'm not talking about effective altruism, Sam Bankman-Fried, but like, I mean, like, how do you actually bring goodness into the world? And that sounds a bit woo-woo, but I mean, these are just things that come up on a 16-kilometer walk. You're like, well, if someone's struggling, like, what do you do? What is the role of philanthropy and charity and I don't know, these kinds of ideas? Because again, in a fiat system, we forget that stuff. And in a system of scarcity, whether it's fiat or not, but a scarce system, it is Darwinism, it's like fight or flight, you got to dog eat dog. But can we actually be good to our fellow man? Because we're actually being good to ourselves.
I think the way the world's gone now, people spend a lot of time wanting to appear to be good. to fellow men, not actually being that good to many fellow men. So I feel like there's a ton of people out there that do things which are more global or more wider because they just want to be seen in the right places to be saying or doing the right thing. So, they might donate to a charity, or they might help organise something for a charity, or they might just make posts supporting something, and that is the most important thing. But actually, I feel like if you really want to do good in this world, I feel like it's about local. I feel like don't waste your time with any of that, and actually look out for the local community around you and the people closest to you, and look for the ones that need help and go and help them. And specifically, don't tell anybody about it, or don't post about it, or don't just go and do it, and you'll be surprised at, well, firstly, you'll feel good for helping them, but then you'll get it back in spades, and it just creates a better feeling. You get stronger bonds with the people around you because they start to appreciate things that you've done for them, and then they're more willing to do things for you, so then you appreciate them more. It builds, and your local community will just start spreading. Your group of friends will get a little bit wider, and they'll be closer, and they'll be, and I feel like that's got a greater global impact than all the nonsense we see today. People, I don't know the modern terms, laughing around or whatever, whatever it is. They're more intent on appearing to be good than actually being good.
Yeah, man. Love thy neighbor, and turn the other cheek. Some fundamental stuff there. But hey, Bitkiwi Paul, it's good to chat. We're
always good.
We're philosophizing, but man, there's been a lot.
Bit of amateur philosophy, nothing beats it.
I think all philosophy is amateur, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, of course.
I guess some people get paid to espouse, but
yeah, actually, I've worked with people with degrees in philosophy. They don't seem like philosophers.
Philosopher kings, Satoshi, the way of being, to give and then to just step aside. There's something profound in all of this, man, and we're working it out as we go. I don't know if we'll ever quite get there, but thank you for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on again. Love it as always.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was the Transformation of Value. If you'd like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.